Good afternoon and welcome back to Health Leaders, the Winning Edge program. This is a weekly series of webinars touching on the topics and strategies that you need to know most. My name is Lori Bierman and I'm the contributing payer editor for Health Leaders, and I'll serve as your moderator for this session. Today's webinar is titled The Winning Edge for Employer GLP-1 Cost Containment. Thank you to you and our audience for participating. Before we get started, for those of you participating in the live program, I have just a few housekeeping details. Our program will be approximately 60 minutes in length. Note that an on-demand version of this program will be available on our YouTube channel on Friday, and it can be accessed through our website, healthleadersmedia.com. To ensure that you can see all of the content for the event, please maximize your event window and be sure to adjust your computer volume settings and/or PC speakers for optimal sound quality. Next, you will find a resources list for today's webinar on the upper right of your screen. Here, we have listed the webinar slide deck and some additional materials for you to download, along with a registration link for future Winning Edge events. At the bottom of your console are multiple widgets that you can use. To submit a question, just click on the Q&A widget. It may be open already and appear on the left side of your screen. You may submit questions at any time during the presentation. However, please note that it is likely that your questions will not be answered until the Q&A portion of the program. And finally, should you experience any technical difficulties during today's program and need assistance, please click on the Help widget, which has a question mark icon, and it covers common technical issues. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. Sandy Baldwin, CMO, Northwell Direct, SVT and Executive Director, Northwell Health Clinical Integration Network IPA. We have Bill Lacey, President and CEO of the Association for Corporate Health Risk Management. And we also have Jeff Post, Chief Clinical Officer of RX Connection. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And with that, let's get on to our discussion. So before we do, it's always great for people to share their experience, and we have a lot of experience on this panel today. So I will start with Sandy. Sandy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone. So Sandy Baldwin, I'm an internist, a practicing internist. I'm with Northwell Health. Northwell Health is in the Northeast, and we're the largest private employer for New York State. So that's a little bit about me, and for this particular conversation, I manage our employees. There's about 85,000 employees and dependents that are part of our self-insured program. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandy. And Bill, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Lori, and thank you everyone for participating. This is going to be a great session. Bill Lacey, I run the Association for Corporate Health Risk Management, ACRM. We're a 13-year-old employer-based national association. We've had over 1,000 employers involved. Each year we work on a series of different initiatives. This year we have 14 different strategic initiatives we're working on, including a weight loss drug pilot, which you'll hear more about as we move forward. But looking forward to it, and thank you, Lori.
You're welcome, Bill. Thank you. And Jeff.
Thank you, Lori. And obviously, appreciate being a part of the conversation today also. Jeff Post, I'm a pharmacist, Chief Clinical Officer. I oversee pharmacy consulting, education, engagement, and guidance with employers and really kind of understanding all of the difficult to understand nuances around the pharmacy benefit landscape. Really unpacking. Again, there's a lot in the news around lack of transparency, lack of alignment, fiduciary responsibility. It's really around giving guidance and support to those employers so they're making better informed decisions around their pharmacy benefits.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. All very important roles in the landscape that we are in. And that gets us right into our first question, which is for each of you to please describe today's overall and very complex cost and risk landscape for employers. And I'd love for Bill to start. What do you think, Bill?
Yes. As a former CFO and looking at human resource executives, we're all challenged today with continuing to offer health insurance benefits to attract and retain our employees, to ensure their organization's employees are healthy, while unfortunately we're working with even tighter budgets and healthcare costs are increasing. Two important things to denote for today is there's from a self-insured standpoint, about 90% of the employers across the country use one of the major insurance carriers, say Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, Cigna, Aetna, or as we more commonly refer to it as BUCA, B-U-C-A. This is the easy button. Most commonly offered by health insurance brokers and consultants, but it may be expensive and inflexible. So something to keep in mind as we're discussing today. Many BUCA self-funded strategies include a drug plan offered by one of the big four PBMs. Aetna is CVS Caremark owns Aetna, Optum uses United, Express Scripts is owned by Cigna, and many of the Blues use Prime Therapeutics. The other 10% of the self-insured employers either utilize one of the 100 or so independent non-insurance carrier-based third-party administrators, or they self-adjudicate. So they're processing their claims themselves. Many of those are usually unions. Many of these entities use one of the 70 or so independent PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers. These employers typically have greater control of their plans, operate with lower costs, and depending upon where you're located, may dictate how your organization is self-funded. For example, Texas and Oklahoma have more independent TPA self-funded employers, while New Jersey, where I'm based, and North Carolina have far less. One final note, the pandemic was not kind to healthcare costs, resulting in more difficult access to care and medical professional shortages. This has led to sharp increases in cancer. That's for most of our employers in our association, that's a top cost, as well as other medical costs. On a positive note, many digital care solutions entered the market addressing behavioral and mental health, musculoskeletal, women's care, cancer, weight management, or healthy weight solutions, along with other modalities. I'll pass it over, Lori. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That is a lot to manage. And Bill, and what you said, the irony is in the manage or in the desire to limit complexity. Sometimes that also limits choice, which doesn't help with cost. So thank you for those call outs. And Sandy, I'd love to ask you the same question.
So I think for today, there's also been a lot of wonderful developments in the last couple of years. So we've relied on science in the past, and science has delivered, and has delivered with such a plum. GLP-1 is just one area where we see innovation that's really revolutionizing healthcare for diabetes and now weight loss. And as we might talk about later in the show here, in the presentation, other indications besides diabetes. We're talking about cell therapy, for example, for treatment of cancers. We're talking about gene therapy for rare inherited conditions. And just to give an example, treatment for sickle cell, for example, sickle cell disease, which can be treated and cured today, it's about $2 to $3 million, depending on the manufacturer, for the gene therapy. So just one case, the gene alone can cost millions of dollars. And that's without including the cost of hospitalizations. A lot of these treatments for gene therapies, for example, it's similar to a bone marrow transplant when somebody's in like an intensive care ICU kind of a condition. So the cost is, really, really high in those scenarios. So we've counted on science, and yes, it's offered some complexity, at least until patents are have to run their time. But we've definitely had a lot of great revolutionary innovations in this space in the healthcare industry. And employers, as was alluded to earlier, we're competing for employees. So we want to be able to offer all of these things because people might choose us solely because they're looking to solve a healthcare issue. So I will pass.
No.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that was a great call out, both the recruitment and retention aspect, but just like wrapping my mind around like the treatment for something related to a single gene could run in the millions. And so speaking of cost and speaking of complexity and risk, Jeff, what would you say about this question?
Yeah, and it is a complex one because obviously there are a lot of great innovations in the space, as Sandy referred to, but there's also obviously the management of that exposure to the risk and making sure our employers' money and our plan sponsor spend is obviously seeing money being well spent and well managed. And obviously there's a really fine line between managing spend and denying therapies or putting up too many complexities. What I think intensifies this, and again, I think it's great that we're having the conversation today, pharmacy and some of the other specialty and gene therapy, this is the fastest growing, fastest cost pressure segment as we think about what's growing or inflating highest total healthcare dollar. It's really in this pharmacy, medication, and therapy treatment space. And so it shouldn't be that we think of what is our medical management strategy, but now we also have to almost have our own complex conversation around what is our pharmacy, drug, gene, and other strategy also, right? It really needs to have its own distinct strategy, its distinct bucket. It's no longer just something that's tucked under a medical conversation and doesn't get airplay. So I think that it's obviously critical that this becomes a part of the conversation. And then obviously digging and immersing yourself into all of the nuances related to it. I think obviously today is just one little piece of that conversation, but it's really around making sure there's exposure and understanding of how this particular component of the medical expense is a topic that's not going to go away. And obviously our goal is to share some insight into our thoughts around some of the GLP-1 specific pieces. But again, this conversation is really positioned, I think, well for that highly inflated space.
Now that is a great, those are great call outs and a perfect segue into the next question, utilization management and what it is, what it isn't, is it just a cost containment strategy? Is it far more than that? It's just an evolving question. And I think, you're so right, Jeff, not only in the space of like gene therapy and GLP-1s, with things like digital therapeutics, the question starts to get elevated, medical benefit or pharmacy benefit. And I know that will be some of what we get into. But before I put the cart before the horse, I'll just start with our next question, which is, what are these current and emerging strategies, including and especially for GLP-1s, that are complicating this already complex landscape that you all have laid out? And feel free to cover the gamut. We do want to talk, of course, about GLP-1s and their many different indications, but bringing each one of your individual experience to bear. So, Jeff, I'll turn it back to you to continue on the topic.
And this is a difficult one. Again, I think there's always been the concern, especially from an employer perspective. I really don't want to get between my member and their physician and their treatment and strategies. But the challenge is we got to kind of back the bus up and think about what happens if we just let that conversation happen without any utilization review, without any oversight. And again, I can even start with the direct-to-consumer advertising, right? Is it fair that our consumers are getting inundated on every commercial about all the things they could be treated with. So now the member's trying to make their own healthcare decisions based on the cool commercial they just saw while they were watching their sporting event. The second one is really the pressure on our prescribers, right? Our prescribers don't really have a great line of sight into cost effectiveness. And again, they're just trying to navigate the very complexity of what insurance are you on? What will your insurance pay for? And it's not about them even understanding cost effectiveness. It's them trying to help them navigate through the complexities of the various different formularies and utilization strategies. So the physician's kind of in a tough position also. And so none of it's going to be easy. The one thing I want to be very clear is sometimes the right answer is no, right? Obviously, as we think about utilization management, it's not here to deny vital and critical therapies, right? It's really around trying to make sure we're guiding members to the most cost-effective medications, making sure they're put on more cost-effective, lower-cost therapies where appropriate. And again, it can't be without the word safety in here. As I think about utilization management, some of these medications have some pretty scary side effects. If you hear those direct-to-consumer commercials, you hear that little blip at the end with all the scary side effects they have. Again, I want to caution that safety also is a part of the conversation. It's not just about chasing the lowest dollar amount, but it's really about putting the member first with a balanced strategy as we think about utilization management. Again, just saying we don't just manage this to get rid of dollars. It's really a more global strategy to also protect the safety and welfare of those members that you're covering. As I think about then complexity, and again, I want to kind of then tie it into GLP-1s also. It is really difficult as we think about the broader conversation. How do we manage risk without denying therapies? How do we not alienate our members with too much complexity in utilization management? Again, the idea here is really putting forth a thoughtful process, but then also having the right strategies in mind as we think about what can we do. And I'm going to complicate this a little further. Your strategies will also be dependent on who are your vendor partners and what are their flexibilities and capabilities, right? As you think about, and again, Bill referred to the BUCAs and the large carriers and larger PBMs. Other PBMs also have different playbooks and different strategies around utilization management. So again, to kind of make the water muddy before we create any clarity, it's really around understanding all of the various nuances in utilization management. And I'll give you a key difference, focused specifically on GLP-1s. They started for diabetes management. They have a lot of wonderful new indications, including weight loss and some additional newer indications since then. And they do actually work. However, pharma did us no favor, and they are actually very expensive also. So now the question is how do I make sure we're spending our money wisely? And again, on diabetes management, there are certain PBMs and certain utilization strategies that are still trying to see whether or not they're appropriate for a first-line agent. Others, if they have diabetes, they're immediately being prescribed, no questions, no ask. So there's some nuances even in the diabetes coverage. When we think about the weight loss and the expanded indications, it becomes much more complex around utilization management. Again, compounding pharmacies, direct to consumers, online offers. Should we cover it under our health plan? Should we ask the member to go to the pharmaceutical manufacturer directly? The one thing I want to share is that simply covering it under the pharmacy benefit, we're kind of beholden to whatever that pharmacy benefit manager's criteria is. And that exposure to cost is really kind of out of your control. It's going to be managed by them. And I'm not going to share any complex strategies, but I just challenge you to kind of think of how can we cover it under our health plan? What does that look like? What is my exposure? If I don't cover it, do I offer my members any other resources or guidance on how they can afford the medication? And this secondary offering, we're really seeing it take off where they understand if they go to the pharmaceutical manufacturer, it's less than half the price than if they go to the pharmacy. And they're trying to figure out a way for the plan sponsor to provide some form of a wellness subsidy or cost offset where they're helping the member afford the medication, but it's starting at a maximum of $1,000 per month instead of a maximum of $1,000 to $1,400 per month. So again, as we think about strategy, it's becoming more and more complex. So ask a lot of questions and immerse yourself in all of the various opportunities. Got a little winded there, but definitely wanted to expand it a little bit.
No, I mean you're right on target, not only with time, but just every point that you touched on. I hear, it's just the consumer, and the different role that really developments like GLP-1s are asking the consumer to play. Um, um, it's going to be really interesting. And so, Sandy, I'd love to move to you next. There's so much to talk about here.
Yeah, I think Jeff's touched on some of them already. But one of the things that I can speak to specifically what we're trying to do at Northwell Health, we're really trying to customize the approach for utilization management. So we're trying, it's not just a drug. Okay, you meet criteria to receive the drug. We're sure that you indeed meet that criteria, the FDA required criteria. But after that, what else can we do to make sure that you're successful in this? We've committed the money and saying, okay, we're covering it. Now what? We don't want members covering it and not, then they fall off the track and it was all for naught. So how do we then support that member, that team member, our colleagues in our case? So we have lifestyle programs, and it's also built in the prior authorization requirement. So in order to be eligible for the drug, and there's some benefit rules that we had to play. We're calling it a wellness benefit because there are regulations around that. But in order for you to qualify for the drug, you have to be enrolled in a lifestyle program. And that lifestyle program is pretty robust. It's, I guess for folks, you can think of it like a Weight Watchers or a Noom. There's monthly classes that are virtual that members have to attend. There's weight check-ins. There is, they get screened for depression, anxiety, other things like that by a therapist who can then, walk them through and work them through that. Their nutrition classes. So there's a bunch of things to help that member, be as successful as possible on their journey. And, one thing where we are struggling with, and I don't think anyone has the answer yet, is how do we, if members want to come off, and this is obviously for non-diabetics, but if members want to come off the drug, what's the off-ramping strategy for them? And right now, we are beholden to the FDA requirement that we have to, you can't, it has to be weekly. We can't titrate dosages other than the manufacturer suggested dosages. We have to follow those regulations. So I have patients personally who would say, you know what, I'm doing my own thing. I'm doing it every other week or something, or, twice a month if I feel like I'm stepping on, gaining some weight back. So people are doing their own thing. This also means that there's a lot of waste. I know I have patients who tell me they've got a package in their refrigerator that they can't use. So these are some of the challenges. But I think incorporating a lifestyle program is along with the coverage is really important, and also reevaluating it. So it's a once and for all, but you evaluate that member. Are you meeting your weight loss? After 6 months, for example, did you get to 5% weight loss as was hoped? If not, where did things go wrong? If you did get that, great. Let's look at you again in 12 months. Where are we now? And this is with the ongoing, of course, lifestyle program. So it's a constant touch and go. And right now, those programs, they can be intense at first and then lighten up. But the point is that there's continuous involvement and connection with that team member. So the lifestyle program is one thing. The second thing we're looking at, and others have done this as well, and it's a decision we have to make because these costs are going up every month. Our CFO comes and says, "What are we doing with this drug cost?" So we're trying other routes, direct to consumer, as Jeff mentioned before. Do we give their team members subsidizes, give them a card, and they, to go get the drug themselves? But then we lose a little bit of the control and the accountability there. And the other thing is that do we increase our copay? Do we increase our member contribution to these drugs? And people have paid with that, and it comes back to that employer-employee conflict there. Do we alienate our employees even more by increasing their copay? And then do we do different copays for different tiers? Employees who make whose incomes are higher, do they pay a larger share compared to employees like in our organization, for example, in our industry, the janitors who clean our hospitals, do they pay the same amount as the physicians in the organization? That also doesn't seem fair. Then there's the health equity piece that I know it's not a favorite topic, but there are definitely populations that tend to be afflicted more. This is a medical fact with this condition, weight loss, obesity, than others. So that's a piece we also want to incorporate and attack there. So coming up with this like a bespoke weight management and utilization program, in our minds would be ideal. But then we fall into issues with the PBMs, as Jeff alluded to, that if we do certain things and we don't follow it to the letter, we lose our rebate opportunity. So it seems like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't kind of situation. And it's really, really challenging because and then the PBMs, as Jeff also alluded to, may not always be transparent about what you're supposed to get. And then, then there's this clawback and that clawback, and it's a constantly changing. So you don't know exactly what you're entitled to begin with. And when you think you know, it's, well, there's this now, and there's a new change now. The other thing we're looking to do and considering is, do we favor one drug and limit our formulary? So, for example, do we do Wegovy or Zepbound instead of Wegovy, or Mounjaro versus Ozempic? How do we favor one over the other? And then that also poses the issue of the manufacturers themselves. Now there's definitely a market there, and they're each kind of trying to one up the other. So trying to predict their moves and who would be best able to offer us the least expensive path forward is also a little unpredictable and contingent on what these big manufacturers are doing. Then there's the pill that's coming out.
Yeah.
What happens then when the pill comes out? Does that mean more team members who were needle shy will now be raising their hand and say, I want to try this now that we have a pill projected to come out Q1, Q2 of next year? So that's another complexity and difficult to anticipate what the anticipated surge in utilization would be.
Yeah, so much. And I mean, just the fact that we have the term clawback in our healthcare economics, says everything that we need to know about pricing transparency and all these things that are hidden that, it's difficult for employers, not to mention almost impossible for consumers. So, Bill, I'd love to turn it over to you next.
Yes, well, first thing to say to everybody on the call, both Jeff and Sandy are valuable resources here. So make sure you jot down their names and connect with them. But looking at things through the employer lens, and I'll start sort of back 10, 15, 20 years ago, we had Weight Watchers, we had Jenny Craig, and then we had a whole slew of wellness solutions that were out there, or you could use surgical options. That seemed to be our weight loss type of strategy. Today, Jenny Craig's gone. Weight Watchers is in the midst of bankruptcy, and you've got a whole long list of other programs or weight management support programs. And then on the scene, 3-5 years ago, we didn't see this on our drug spend list. Now we've got GLP-1. So if you were an employer that wasn't watching so closely and you did cover GLP-1, suddenly this is one of your top 3 to 5 total cost drugs on your list. And so GLP-1s absolutely can offer possible benefits to your employees. There's no doubt. However, and I can't say it enough, and you heard it both from Jeff as well as Sandy, use caution here. Our association, ACRM, identified this issue and assembled a weight loss drug pilot in early 2024. And I'm going to just give a few pieces of information or things that have been recommended by our employers, PBM consultants, among others. And first is, while nausea and loss of lean muscle mass are common side effects, we will not know the side effects for another several years. It sounds remarkable right now, but we're not going to know some of these things until some time. Additionally, use caution regarding compounding or other solutions that are non-FDA approved. Jeff highlighted that just a moment ago. You're seeing television ads for these. They may or may not continue into the future, but if, as cited earlier, if the cost is $1,000 to $1,500 a month, but you can get a compounded solution for $200 a month, you need to be aware of that as an employer, that your employees could be doing that. Also, use caution. We found that there's a few ways to make GLPs a more effective solution, including making sure you incorporate this into a healthy eating and weight strategy that includes, as Sandy mentioned, onboarding as well as exit strategies, which it really depends on what PBM you're using or the flexibility you have there. So you need to be a little cognizant when you're doing that. We in our association like to call that building in guardrails, and you do need to explore that. Other things that we're seeing out there is both of them. There's two manufacturers right now, Lilly and Novo, and you heard some of the brand names from Sandy, but both have a direct-to-consumer pricing module or option, which, as Jeff cited, is at least 50%, if not greater, less than what employers get through their PBM or insurance plans. So it's a great option, but it just brings to the front, builds all the awareness. You're talking about the PBM manufacturer's rebate gets eliminated, and any commissions and other fees. So there's at least 50% of the cost that's going to somebody else to make this happen. So we are also exploring, can employers get connected to those strategies? And I guess finally to say here is you just want to be upfront. You want to be aware to see what your PBM may support, because they may not be as flexible as you might think. And this could create difficulties. They could threaten to withhold the rebate for the GLP-1s, or they could threaten to withhold rebates to all drugs. So bottom line, Lori, I'd say it could be a great solution. Just be very cautious. And if you cannot build guardrails, you probably do not want to cover GLP-1s.
That is a great seg into our next question. Before I advance the slide, there's just a couple of things that have been recurring that have stood out to me. One is the getting off the drug. Usually when we talk about utilization management, it's like, I can't get on the drug that I want to be on. It's the quantity limits and the step therapy. Now that's that's not the whole picture, but with GLP-1s, it's a very real situation. The coming off strategy, the coming off part of the utilization management strategy, and we might be able to talk about that more in our Q&A. I want to be respectful of the next planned question that we have, which is, where do we go from here? And Bill, you kicked that off great. Where do we go from here to achieve long-term ROI, and how can all stakeholders benefit? So Bill, do you want to continue that?
Yes. And I would like to start it, Lori, again, a comment I made earlier, but any employer that may be on this call, make sure, if you don't have a PBM consultant, make sure you consider bringing a PBM consultant. They're worth their weight in gold. Also collaborate with other employers. So make sure you're reaching out to folks like Sandy. Those are probably the two most valuable takeaways from today's session. But as a former CFO, and we talk about return on investment, I find that ROI in this whole industry of healthcare is an abused term. These ROI numbers seem to be all over the board, and I don't think there's been a whole lot of thought into how they actually get created. But just from a basic standpoint, the investment, whatever you're going to put into an initiative, sits in the denominator. That's the bottom part. And then the benefits or improvements go up in the numerator. So what I would suggest is when you are looking at the long-term ROI, I would look at two scenarios. One is, what if we don't do anything? What if we decide to withhold from GLP-1s? And then the second is, if we do it, what's that going to mean for us? So just, Lori, just a couple of basics, and I know people probably already are thinking about this, but the investment would be the cost of covering the GLP-1s, and that's the drug costs, the administrative fees, the commissions, not only to the PBM, but also to your broker, among others. You want to make sure if you're going to bring in, and again, we call this the guardrails, just a support program, and then other resources. All of those need to go into your investment. And then the cost, it could be as Jeff had mentioned earlier, $1,000 to $1,500 per employee, and in utilizing the GLP-1s. And if you implement a support program or related resources, we call these the guardrails, you need to add that into your investment. The benefits of this are, from a financial standpoint, can be very compelling. It could create a culture of attracting and retaining employees, because you may have employees that are seeking you out or staying with you because you do offer this. So you're not replacing or training new employees as a result of not offering this. Avoiding weight loss related or weight related conditions, type 2 diabetes, joint replacements, cardiac or pulmonary conditions, other possible medical issues. And you would need to deduct the costs associated with such things as side effects. And that's the unknown right now. And that could be significant depending upon what happens. I'm not saying it's going to happen here, but remember fen-phen. But in regards to the status quo scenario, it's a relatively small investment. And just some things in there is if you do not cover, you could be losing, or you may have disgruntled employees. You'll need to add those in as costs. But in terms of a long-term ROI, again, if you don't have the ability to put in these other programs or manage it in some way to the benefit of your organization as well as to the benefit of the employees, at this point, you probably might want to hold off on covering GLP-1s, because there is going to be a lot of changes over the course of these next couple of years, and we'll see more competitors coming in also. But I'm going to stop it there, Lori. I think that gives a little bit of perspective on ROI.
Oh, absolutely, it does. And I really liked that you pulled out to the 60,000 foot view, Bill, of just ROI in healthcare in general. It's the never-ending question when the newest, greatest thing comes along. It's always the first question. And, the ROI is going to be different depending on the use of the GLP-1. One topic of one area of potential treatment that has been talked about is addiction. So what about the ROI for that? So there's just so much around this question, including how all stakeholders can benefit. That's always the challenge. So with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I feel like we're just adding to, not confusion, but adding to the concern. But I think it's a valid point, which is I think the challenge as we think about a return on our investment is we have to come in eyes wide open, right? Know your blind spots, ask a million questions, do a lot of research. Don't just believe that if you're with a large carrier that theirs is the only tool set you have available. You have to kind of go outside of that also and start thinking more holistically, right? As I referred to and Cindy referred to, there's all kinds of strategies you can think of. There are tripping points you have to worry about, but think of what are all of the strategies, and then take that back and think about what applies to my staff. I think one of the biggest challenges we've seen with employers is they go in a direction and then they hit the brakes or slam it in reverse. Again, I think that's been one of our largest concerns. Employer creates a strategy, costs escalate quickly on GLP-1s or some other coverage, and they say July 1, it's dead, right? Kill it, I can't afford it. And then what's the fallout, right? There is no ROI most likely because the investment was too big and too short. You also ended all coverage, and so it gets back to the maintaining the outcomes. And again, Sandy touched on it, the offloading, right? How do we stop a member from taking a medication that's achieved an outcome and do it in a way that's safe and also maintains those results? And again, I think that's the one scary part that everybody's concerned about. It seems like a great investment. It seems like there should be an ROI. However, if they do it for weight loss and they stop the medication and they rebound and gain all the weight back, I feel like that was a really poor or a lost investment. So again, there's a million companies literally popping up. They come to me, I'm like, who, what? They're literally popping up out of the weeds regularly. And there is a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of programs that have absolutely no clinical effectiveness. They're simply just, hey, we've got a coach and we'll help you and we'll create a storyline, but there's no basis, there's no history. So be sure to do a ton of research. Really think about the I first. What is my investment and how do I make sure I'm putting up the appropriate guardrails as Bill shared and making sure I have a very succinct plan and I understand all of the things I can do to manage my exposure. And then from a return perspective, put a lot of thought into, okay, what are the pitfalls of covering this? What if the medication stops abruptly? What else should I be thinking of where my investment could have no return? How do I think of a thoughtful way to counteract that lost investment? Again, just thinking more holistically. There's no silver bullet. We're not going to just come to you and say, prescribed way, save a ton of money, guarantee ROI. It doesn't happen. So we really just want to make sure you're putting a lot of thought into the process.
I think that's great, Jeff. Yeah. Oh, did somebody have something to add? Was that Bill or? No, I'm sorry. I'm hearing. Oh, what was that? What was that, Jeff? I'm sorry.
I was just trying to return it back to you, let you know I was wrapping. I did a poor handoff. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No. Please don't worry about it. One of the early things that you touched on, Jeff, was the involvement of carriers. And, we're getting into an environment where there may not be a carrier involved, not even from a TPA standpoint. There's so much going on. And it's still, I think it's still relatively new. This is, Sandy will speak to this, expertly, just the direct contracting, that relationship with the employer and the employee and, more directly with provider networks. So then we're getting into all kinds of different stakeholder dynamics that are still being fleshed out. So with that, I want to turn it over to Sandy on this last question.
Thank you. I think the number one question, if I'm going to borrow Bill's CFO hat first for a second, the first question I would really ask to determine my game plan is, what's the tenure of my employees? If it's a very short tenure, probably not worth the investment. And I say that tongue in cheek because it sounds almost from a physician, but it's just from a financial perspective. It's, first of all, they're not going to be with you. They can leave your job, that employee, and go to somebody who doesn't cover it. And then what did you do for them for a year? Not much, probably. So I would look at the tenure. The longer organizations with long tenures, definitely I think we will see that return on investment. So as alluded to earlier, reduction in hypertension, high cholesterol, cardiovascular events, sleep apnea. Now it's for fatty liver disease, maybe Alzheimer's, not sure yet, but definitely for all those chronic conditions, if someone is with you for a good while, they very well likely might, if their conditions are not addressed, might get those complications. So you really have to ask that question first. The other thing in the financial on the utilization piece is you could, if they're well controlled and people lose the weight, they may come off of other medications, insulin, for example. Therefore, the cost of that might go down. Continuous glucose monitors, and most people in insulin are on right now. Those, Dexcom, just as an example, those are pretty expensive. That's the number one cost for our DME, book of business. Is diabetic supplies is right up there in terms of cost and adding to the expenditures. So maybe cutting back, and we should be seeing less and less of those things because they're not on insulin, they're not checking their finger sticks or need to check that often, so they're in better control. Reduction in other medications, so maybe they came down 1 or 2 blood pressure medications. So the overall sum of medication employees are taking. The other thing is, with weight, orthopedic procedures. We need less knee surgeries, less hip surgeries because people are not as heavy and not straining, putting undue stress on those joints. Therefore, they don't need as many surgeries. And then here's the other metric that's a little softer but very important is productivity. Are people out less for sick, for managing medical conditions and other things that are also reduction in productivity, impacts an organization, P&L a great deal. So looking at it from that perspective too. So I think going back to the first question is what's my tenure of my employees? And I would use that to, that's my springboard to then, okay, I'm covering it if they're with me for a long time. And then if I'm covering it, as my colleagues alluded to earlier, what guardrails do I put to make sure that it doesn't penalize the other conditions and other expenses that I have to cover as part of my benefit package.
You brought up something, Sandy, that I had just never thought of, which is the impact on the medical device market. With fewer finger sticks and other types of things for monitoring conditions related to whether it be weight or diabetes. I mean, it's this ripple effect. And we have absolutely, we're starting to see, but we're just so early in seeing like what these ripples are going to be, all of the areas of healthcare that GLP-1s and other, high cost drugs, specialty pharmacy are going to touch. Does anybody want, we've got a little bit of time before we go to Q&A. Does anybody want to make a concluding comment about any of that before we move on?
I just want to mention one thing. What's Medicare's role in this? So we've seen the federal government, we just saw that they're now negotiating, which they hadn't done before. They've negotiated with Medicaid for the rates for gene therapy, for certain gene therapies. So they're kind of setting the standard there. So what is whether they're paying for it, I know there's recently said they were not going to pay for it for a weight loss for the Medicare population. But a lot of the BUCAs, as Jeff alluded to, the Blues, the United, the Cignas, the Anthem, the Aetnas, they take their cues from what Medicare pays for, and they follow suit often. So let's see where they go on Medicare and where the federal government lands on this. And that will probably predict the behavior of a lot of these health plans moving forward.
It certainly will. That's a fantastic call out. And I just want to thank all of you once again for an excellent discussion. And that discussion is not over. We are going to move now to the Q&A portion of our conversation today. And I think before we get to some of the specific questions, I just want to put it out to each one of you, was there anything that we did not talk about today through the course of these questions, or something that you wanted to expand on a little bit more. And Bill, is it okay if I start with you? And then like maybe, maybe just like a minute or so on that before we do some of the Q&As that have come in.
Yes, thank you, Lori. I touched on it briefly, but $1,000, $1,500 a month, that's going to be $12,000 to $18,000 a year. And if that continues over a period of time, it starts to push up the surgical options, either bariatric or gastric bypass surgery. So I think an employer needs to start to weigh both of those. The other thing that we have just seen is what are some of the ancillary benefits of GLP-1s? And there was a study, article published on the benefits of GLP-1s with managing migraines. And I think you're going to potentially see some of that. So surgery and ancillary benefits were the two things I'd like to put on the table.
Okay, thank you. And then Jeff, what about you?
I didn't hit on this, but I think it's the manufacturer coupons. I think also we have to kind of take into the conversation. And again, as you think about the economics, as Bill alluded to, it's $1,000 to $1,500 a month for the meds. If you're getting your rebates, I know pharmacy is very complex, but you're still typically paying $700 to $800 a month, net of copays, net of rebates, right? I'm still investing that much on a monthly basis. And my member has access to manufacturer coupons, typically completely erasing. They're getting it for free or for $25. There's no skin in the game as we think about the ROI and their commitment to losing weight and hitting outcomes. If they're not paying anything for it, are they really that committed, or are they just wanting to trial it? Again, I'm thinking of the economic imbalance here. Employers on the hook for a lot. That's why I think there's a tremendous amount of energy in these alternative strategies. How do I take advantage of that lower cost point? How do I make sure my member's paying a fair amount that they can still afford, but I'm still helping them afford it? Again, trying to just bust the system of normal coverage up. Again, I think we have to, right? We're paying $700, a member can go buy it direct for $500. It's not fair to us as employers that economic is backwards. We need to start thinking about those other strategies. Again, it's got to be a part of the conversation, unfortunately.
No, it does.
Sorry, Lori, I was just going to say, Jeff's got a great point there, because it takes that GLP-1 out of the plan, and now it gives the employee the benefit to go direct to buy this, and then offering some kind of support. And it could be either additional HSA dollars, or it could be something else that the employer gives directly to the employee to enable him or her to purchase that at $500, because through the plan, it's going to be much more expensive.
Oh, that's great. And Sandy, do you want to add on to that?
Just commenting and following up on what my colleagues mentioned here. Caution in terms of revamping or off-ramping of these drugs. That's probably when you need more intense medical management programs. Mm-hmm. So I'd said before, you get on the program, you're doing well, you kind of you're self-directed and you're doing what you're supposed to. But now the next surge of activity or high density activity would be when you're trying to take those members off. Now you're going to have an uptick in care management support for those members. So the cost can go up and then come down. But then if you're looking to off-ramp, that's probably when you're going to have a higher utilization of care management and that time as well.
No, that's a great additional call out. So I just wanted to touch on one of the questions that came in. A great conversation, so much to think about. As an employer, where would I start? If you were to give me 3 things to think about, which are also a great way to just talk about some key takeaways as we're ending, what are the top 3 things I should be thinking about? And Jeff, would you like to start?
Yep. Start with obviously asking questions within your network, right? Start asking those questions of your advisor, your carrier, your system, right? Second one, I think the question I would do, and again, it's more broadly, what else can I be looking at that if I look outside of my kind of infrastructure, right? Like, what can I do within my standard way of advice? What can I do outside of my standard way of advice? And again, I think the third very specific one I would say is make sure you ask questions on kind of like what we shared today specifically. If you go to your normal source, you feel like you're getting sold a bill of goods, you look and you don't find it, you might have to go out and search for those additional strategies. Again, I feel like the direct to pharma strategy is one that's curious, but it's not well baked, if you will, right? There's still a lot of things we can do to make that process even better and safer. So I think it's a development that has great opportunity, but it's not a turnkey solution either. I can't just say do this and save this. It's really around making sure you're asking all those questions.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And Sandy, as an employer, you all have asked yourself this question, and you're into your strategy now. So what would you advise?
In addition to what Jeff said, I would say, other decisions you might want to consider. Do you cover this for just your employees, or do you cover this for dependents as well? That's another sticking point for us. Do you limit that? Do you limit your provider network? And again, it's a conversation with your third-party administrator. Can you limit your provider network to use a subset of providers that will, be thoughtful about the prioritization, follow it to the T, and help you and help that team member be successful in the journey? Those are just, and then looking again at all these alternative strategies that are coming out, the HSA, removing it from the pharmacy benefit allows you to get away and get encumbered from some of the restrictions and regulations that the companies have put in place. So it kind of frees you up to come up with a customized plan that you can then leverage. So I would say definitely look into a customized plan that you can, pull on, 1, 2, or 3 levers to get some skin in the game, as Jeff alluded to get some flexibility in the cost, to get the ability to add a lifestyle program in addition to the drug. It just allows you, and allows you also to administer the program the way you want. I'll leave it at that.
That's great. That's great. And in our last minute or so, Bill, how would you end on that question?
Yeah, great question, and thank you for presenting it. But Sandy and Jeff did a wonderful job in addressing that. So I'd say 3 things. Number 1, why do you want to consider this? Number 2 is, how are you going to implement that? And again, I would put in there these guardrails. And then finally, how are you going to pay for it? And the looking at those 3 compelling questions and what you come out of that, I think will help you to chart out your plan.
Yes, and there are so many other things that we could have talked about. One kind of silent thread that I heard coming up, and it's reflected in one of the questions as well, is just the regulatory element, the compliance element. What levers can you pull in the highly regulatory environment that healthcare is, but one that needs to be very innovative to succeed? So unfortunately, we don't have time to answer that question on the panel because that's all the time that we have. I just want to say in closing, first and foremost, absolutely thank our panel. Just a tremendous discussion. We touched on so many things. In closing, I will note that we do have another Great Winning Edge program coming up on July 29th, and this will be the Winning Edge for Investing in Technology. A live clickable link will appear at the close of this program, and that'll take you to the registration for that event. And remember to follow along all week long for our continued coverage on Employer GLP-1 Cost Containment by visiting our website. I just want to thank our panelists once again, Sandy Baldwin with Northwell, Bill Lacey with Akram, And last but not least, Jeff Post with RX Connection. It was an excellent discussion. Finally, thank you too for our audience for participating. We really hope that you enjoyed today's program, and we look forward to seeing you during our next Winning Edge program on investing in technology. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you.